my paper, Critical Studies 2 with Module 5, Age of Anthropocene. Today we shall look at the literary representations of the Anthropocene by AMITAV GHOSH. AMITAV GHOSH. He is a seasoned writer of global history and migration, particularly across Indian Ocean diaspora. His works has always attended to patterns of displacement or trade routes and to credit questions about bioengineering, biopolitics as seen in books like The Calcutta Chromosome. Similarly, his work centers on literary representations of natural disasters like The Great Derangement. In this work, which is one of GHOSH's few non-fiction works, he continues to employ a number of figurative and literary tools, while he attempts to bridge the gap between mainstream literature and nature writing. In many senses, modern mainstream fiction is exploitative of nature, and its concern is reflective of anthropocentric pursuits. Environment in modern mainstream fiction is most acutely represented through the setting of the novel, which is often read as backdrop for the book's human characters, their development and plot, nothing more. Stories that authors have written surrounding the issue of climate change often are classified with the science fiction genre. But as GHOSH says, the Anthropocene resists science fiction. It is precisely not an imagined other world, nor is it located in another time or another dimension. GHOSH argues an important point against classifying climate change stories as science fiction, since it carries futuristic disaster imagery and denotes climate change as fantasy, surrealist, far away. But climate change stories, however, involve disaster in the present, future as well as in the past, and more collective elements beyond the science. Another important idea is the question of the novel. In the Age of the Anthropocene begins with GHOSH asking, what is the place of the non-human in the modern world? Exactly in a period of which human activity was changing the Earth's atmosphere, that the literary imagination became radically centered on the human. So what is the place of the non-human? Our physical exploits were visibly manifested through the literary. Since the human race became industrial, we regard ourselves as separate from nature. GHOSH offers a pointed history of the effects of industrialization and urbanization on climate crisis. Port cities such as London and Amsterdam are protected from open waters by bays or deltaic river systems. But cities built after European global expansion in the late 17th century in India, such as Mumbai, Chennai, are instead built directly on seafronts and therefore are the more susceptible to superstorms. The Great Derangement is essentially a great denial of climate crisis, but not by climate deniers on the fringe of politics, but actually, as GHOSH argues, by state-sanctioned engineers and government agencies themselves. The idea that disaster management is mostly focused on post-disaster, after disaster response is to neglect and disregard a risk that feels more likely like an inevitability. Moving to the book, The Great Derangement, the book is divided into 3 sections. First one, stories, second, history, and the third section, politics. Each of which serves in different ways to address the crisis of climate change and the great derangement of our times. Stories. The first section, stories, employs historical anecdotes and scenes from GHOSH on novels to situate us in the geographical spaces of the Anthropocene. For this, the writers and artists need to incorporate climate change into their works. The subject should move in from the peripheries of fiction writing, as he goes to suggest that, for let us make no mistake, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture and thus of imagination. GHOSH compares two famous texts on climate change that came out in 2015. The first one, encyclical letter by Pope Francis, issued in May, and the second is a text of the Paris Agreement on climate change. While the first is a direct from the heart title On Care for Our Common Home, the letter by Pope, the second, the text of the Paris Agreement on climate change, is in official and technical language. The second section of the book is titled History, and it details an account of climate change for Asia. He argues that Asia will be the most vulnerable continent to environmental disaster. He situates climate crisis in the onslaught of global capitalism, and especially in the case of developing countries, in the manifestation of the paradoxical state of modernity today. In the final section, Politics, he condemns the narrow bandwidth of political concern. It is a call to writers, artists, politicians, economists, industrialists, scientists, and all people to awake out of the derangement, the danger. Thus, GHOSH uncritically employs the term Anthropocene, the age of man, as a colloquialism for climatic crisis and terrestrial destruction. More precisely, it signifies a new geographical epoch, painting interdisciplinary ratification to a narrative of human appropriation of the planet.